Okay.
Hi, Nazia.
Hi there. Hi.
Hi, everyone.
We're just letting everyone in. Perfect. Okay. Good. Hi, everyone. Okay, so we have got, I think we've got more than enough quorum to get started.
Yeah.
Perfect. Everyone, thank you so much for showing up on time. It was great. It's lovely to see those numbers building up before 4 o'clock hits. And so welcome to our session. So as usual, before we begin our actual talk, we're just going to have a look at what we're doing. So this is part of the Keep Going, Keep Growing sessions, which are in response to COVID-19 school closures. We're finding a way to support parents and professionals because a lot of parents of neurodiverse learners have expressed concerns about their child regressing. So we're trying to put together these sessions to use the flexibility of homeschooling so that parents can develop skills in their learners and possibly send them back to school having gained something that they can utilize when schools start. In particular, this time we've got a 4-part series, and this is the Exploring the Mind series. So today we're going to be hearing from Scylla, who's going to be talking to us about memory. Next week on the 4th of July, I will be talking to you about executive functioning. And the week after, we will have Dave Green talking about metacognition, and that's on the 11th of July. On the 18th of July, we all come together and you get an opportunity to meet and ask the panel. Of course, after this, technically schools will be closed and we're going to be moving, keep going, keep growing into a new phase. So keep an eye out for that because we find that this has been quite useful and we're hoping to continue supporting parents even after schools have opened. So I'll give you a bit of a background. I'm sure some of you are familiar with me, so excuse the repetition. Bit of a background on myself. I live in the UK. I'm an inclusive education consultant with over 14 years of experience in inclusion. I support learners' academic development and my experience spans from working with learners, training teachers, working with parents and developing programs for the learners that I work with. Fortunately, I've been able to work with students in East Africa as well as here in the UK. Thankfully, we've got virtual and teletherapy, and that's really come in handy. Today, our speaker who's going to be talking to us about memory is Scylla. She has guided learning support in a number of British and international schools. And currently, she's an educational consultant who specializes in assessing learners and their learning needs. And as a result, she is able to provide guidance on how to meet the needs of these learners and how to support them. Right now, Scylla is pursuing a PhD in educational psychology, where she's particularly focusing on the impact of anxiety on learning. However, today she's going to be talking to us about memory. Just to have a look at a couple of our housekeeping rules, please note that this session will be recorded. If you'd like your identity to not be disclosed, please, you can turn off your mic or you can turn off your camera. We request that you do not disclose the names of any of your children or the place that you work because these sessions will be aired. We're not providing any medical advice, so if there's anything that you want to implement with your child, please observe caution. Use the chat box to make any comments. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask while we're going through the presentation, just put that in the chat box and Scylla and I will be able to attend to them later on. And if you want any further advice, you can contact Scylla or myself, and because we will be providing you with our contact details, which you should already have from the introduction newsletter. So without further ado, I'm going to hand our session over to Scylla.
Right, hello everybody. I'm hoping my Wi-Fi is going to behave, and if it doesn't, Nazi is on standby to change the subject quickly, but let's just hope that it all works. Meanwhile, greetings from Kenya, and it's really lovely to see the range of countries that are here today, and it just shows how wonderful the opportunities that that Zoom and presenting on Zoom and digitally can give us. Without much more ado, I'm going to get started because we don't have much time. I would encourage you to just throw questions as we go along into the chat box, but we'll probably hold questions until the end because it might be that I cover the answers anyway. But I might be asking you to react, so make sure you know where your reaction button is. And you might need a pencil and paper next to you because I'm going to maybe give you some work to do while we're on this. But mainly we're here to learn, to understand how we can help our students and to have some fun. Right, I'm going to share my screen and we are going to start. All right, I hope that everybody can see that. Okay, you know who I am, so I'm going to go straight in. And the first thing, oh, Nazia, it won't, how do I make it? Oh, it's working now. All right, sorry, technical. Right, okay, before we get started, I want you to have a look at this number. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to remember it, and don't cheat, so don't write it down. Okay, that doesn't help you. Okay, ready? We're going to carry on. Why won't it? How can I get it to? Okay, sorry, it's obviously being a little bit. All right, we're going to have a chat about a little bit. I want to give you a little bit of background to memory and learning. I don't want to spend too much time on the technical stuff. I want us really to get, you know, deep down and dirty into how we can support our memories and how we can improve them. When we are talking about learning, I want you to imagine a kitchen stool. And the important thing about that kitchen stool is that for you to be able to sit on it comfortably, it needs to have a level seat. So the baseline down here is pretty important as a start. And I consider that really the sensory, I'm actually going to put a laser pointer rather than a highlighter. Your sensory baseline, your sensory processing, I think is really the beginnings of that, and making sure that your sensory system is fully integrated and balanced is really important. And this is where our occupational therapists come in, and physiotherapists and things like that. So we need to have a nice level playing field or a nice level floor that the stool is going to stand on. We've then got four legs. The first one of these, I think about the core ability, and that's kind of like the size of the engine and the bonnet. If you're thinking about a car, that drives or guides how much potential you've got and what we can expect you to be able to achieve. We've then got the processing systems, and that includes today's topic, memory. But you cannot have core ability if you don't have that processing. So processing is super important. Memory, information processing, all those kind of things come into play with supporting that core ability and allowing and enabling us to actually access that potential. We've then got something like called executive functioning, which Nazia is going to go into in more detail in the next week or two. So other than to say it is super important, and you probably don't even realize it's there unless you have a specific problem with it. But if you think about getting into a car and driving without really thinking too much about it, you know what's going to happen if you start the ignition, if you turn the wheel, if you hit the brake, if you hit the accelerator. You know what you need to do in order to go around the corner or to stop. That cause and effect, that ability to shift from one activity to another, that transition, that ability to actually initiate an action in the first place, that all comes from your executive functioning. And without your executive functioning, you're not going to be able to actually access that core potential or that core ability. Finally, we do need some attention and the motivation to actually engage. So those kind of come together to give us our ability to learn successfully. There is more than that. Emotion is in there, self-regulation, that all comes under that motivation, communication, but kind of that's a very simplified step forward as to what we need to achieve. So today we're focusing on this processing speed and this processing system, and we're going to be just focusing on memory. Right. Before we go any further, very quickly, write down that number I asked you to remember. Oh. You done? Have you written down that number? Can we see some thumbs up? Nadia, let me know when you think we've got enough thumbs up.
A little bit tricky for me. I'm just trying to, we've got 1, 2, 3. We've got 3 people who've raised their hand.
Come on, guys.
And we've got a few attempts. Oh, these are people with some really great memories. The chat box, which means we don't really.
Put it in the chat box. The others can cheat.
Yeah, so I don't know now who's.
That's okay. So let's have a look. Oh. Why does it not always let me? Oh, there we go. Right. So now let's see some honesty. So how many of you got it right?
We've got 73940,582. 73540,582. So someone's forgotten the 9 there. 73940,582. 73940,582. 703840582. I feel like someone was just putting as many numbers as they can remember. I couldn't remember.
Okay.
So
just have a think about, I want you to take a moment to think about your emotional reaction to me going, write down that answer. Did it make you worry? Did you feel stressful? Did you find it funny, or were you immediately in a negative and emotional place? Did it make you feel under pressure to actually suddenly have to perform, and you thought you was quite safe behind your screen and in another country? So I want you to think about and take a moment to pause and reflect on the emotion that is connected to that experience. Okay. All right, another task, shopping list. Guys, there's your shopping list. I'm going to give you 10 seconds. Don't write it down. I want you to see how many of those you can try and remember. I'm going to read them out because that sometimes is quite a crucial thing. Swimsuit, bread, frying pan, magazine, sugar, toothpaste, pencil, beetroot, tax returns, chicken, fly spray, and paint. Okay, so what is memory? What do I mean? What am I talking about? What do we know about it? Long-term memory is, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because we don't have the time, but just giving you a taster. Long-term memory is kind of is the big memory bank. It's where we can hold information indefinitely. It's kind of our information base. It's where all that prior knowledge gets stuck into. So when you learn something, that's where, and it sticks, that's where it is stored, is in that information, in that long-term memory. We've kind of got, there are 2 or 3 kind of areas, which just, I'm not going to go into detail, but we do have like the explicit memory, which is kind of declarative. It's the facts, it's that data bank, it's what you know, it's events. That's a dog. I know it's a dog because I recognize it. We also have something called implicit memory, which is much more procedural. Going back to the car, knowing how to drive that car, that automatic memory, knowing how to write without consciously having to think about it, knowing how to make breakfast or scrambled egg, unless you're me. So that long-term memory, that implicit procedural long-term memory is slightly different to the explicit declarative long-term memory. And your implicit memory is kind of like the past, it's the memory, and your procedural memory, it's kind of the newer stuff that you're adding in there and building on. Then we have, what do I need to press? Let me keep, there we go. Short-term memory. Now, just going to say at this point that there are quite a few different theories about memory, and this one is based on the kind of the most accepted one, that short-term memory is a different place. It is much more temporary. It doesn't hold as much stuff. It's kind of like the drop zone at school. You can't hang around there for long. It's got a very important role. It can't hold very much, but you need to be able to get in there, drop your stuff or pick up that bit of memory, hold on to it for a few seconds, and then either move it into long-term memory or move on. So it's short-term frame. It doesn't hold much. It's just like your car that's going to school. You can only fit 3 or 4 kids in there. You can't manipulate the information in your short-term memory. It is just for storage. Okay. Why does it take? It's a different thing each time. Working memory. And some people seem to think that working memory and short-term memory are the same, but they're not. And the main difference is that with working memory, you can and need to and have to and must manipulate information in there. So if I was to give you 3 numbers, 7, 3, 6, to remember, and then I said to you, okay, say them backwards. You've got to use your working memory. You've got to hold those numbers and cognitively apply your thinking to change the order so that you can give me those numbers back. So working memory allows you to manipulate the information. But again, it's like short-term memory in that it's not a huge bank and it doesn't hold a lot of stuff, and you can't hold stuff in there for very, very long. So working memory is kind of what I'm going to be working on, and the relationship between working memory and long-term memory is what we're going to focus on today, because it's the key skill or key memory skill that your kids need to know and need to be able to access when they're in the classroom. So let's try and get, okay. There are a couple of other aspects of memory that we will talk about as well. Visual memory, verbal memory, and memory, okay, where's it gone? The last one, oh there, memory for information in context. So we will store, how many of you have read a book and then gone to see the movie about that book and gone, what? No, that's not how it is at all. And it's kind of that reaction and that realization that we do store information as images. And that is a really, really, really important thing to bear in mind. And if you're not doing that successfully, you'll find that you can read a paragraph and immediately think, well, I have no idea what that was about, and have to go back and read it again. So that ability to store information visually is a really, really, really important part of it. Now, we're going to talk about how can we do this? How can we improve? Oh, that picture's not meant to be there. Never mind. How can we improve and build that? So out of interest, take your pencil and paper and just very quickly write down that shopping list, and let's see how many of those items you can actually remember. Give us a thumbs up when you're ready.
So far we have no thumbs up, so I don't know if that means no one remembers it. Okay, we have 1 thumbs up. Okay, someone said tax return.
That's a bad memory. You remember the negatives, and that's a very relevant point.
Quite a few people saying, oh, we have only remembered 5 being blank. Someone remembered 2, someone remembered 1. We're getting 1 person giving us in bits and pieces, so I don't know if they're sort of just trying to process that information and trying to just recall it slowly by slowly. So I'd say, I don't think there's anyone who remembers everything that was on that list.
Out of interest, can anybody give us comments on how they try to remember? Did you apply any strategies to that?
Hello, Nazia, Pauline here.
Hi.
Sorry. Yes. For the number, it was very easy because, you know, numbers you can always associate with something. This one was difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just
because it's
memorizing the first 5, and that was it.
So,
and you see, you remember that when I put remembering memory of things in isolation and things in context. This is an example of memory of items in isolation, because there's nothing to connect them together. So if I told you a story and then said, right, tell me back the main ideas, you'd probably actually be able to do that without any problem at all, because you can make the connections and you can use the association. But if by giving you a random list of questions, you've got no connection, there's no reason to link them together.
That is true.
This is where we're talking about. Now, if you can create that association, you will find that your memory and your ability to recall things is much more efficient. So if you've parked your car in the supermarket car park, those enormous car parks you have in England, and walked off and your mind was distracted when you left, if you haven't made that association, if you're anything like me, and I've spent hours in England wandering around car parks, and the worst thing is when you've got a friend's car that you've borrowed and you realize that you're not sure that you know what type of car it was, what color car it was, and what the number was, and it's very embarrassing. So I've just popped up 2 examples on the screen here. One says ACIT, and that is what we're talking about here. ACIT, association, color, and exaggeration. And we're going to talk around that a little bit. Now, this very beautiful picture on the side is my interpretation, or in my mind, how I pictured and visualized and linked some of those images together. So what I did is sorry, I've just got to move this because it's, I can't see the picture. Oh, there we go. I've done that now. So you don't need to draw it. You just need to talk yourself your way through it. So my thought was, okay, we've got a beetroot, and my image was a beautiful lady with a beetroot head wearing a lovely red polka dot swimming costume. So that's beetroot and swimming costume. And I did it that her legs went down into a pencil so that she could write. So that's beetroot, swimming costume, and pencil. In one hand, she's got a frying pan. And in the frying pan is a bit of bread, and spread on the bread is toothpaste, and sprinkled on the toothpaste is sugar. Okay, so there we've got the 7 items. The other hand, she's got a fly spray, and it's spraying out a multicolored, like rainbow of colors, so that I've got the paint. All right. Finally, in the air, I've got the most enormous, biggest, fattest chicken you can imagine trying to fly. And you know chickens can't fly. So this chicken is, in my mind, flapping along, making a mission of actually trying to fly. And under his elbow, or under his wing, sorry, he's got a great big fat file that's got tax returns written over it. And it's causing him to fly at an angle because it's so heavy. So you see, I've brought in association, color, and exaggeration. So in my mind, I then can go to the shop and I can picture the beetroot of the big, beautiful beetroot face, the lovely red polka dot swimming costume she's wearing, the beautiful writing coming out of her pointy pencil feet, the frying pan with the piece of bread in it that's spread with bright blue toothpaste and yellow sugar sprinkled on top of it. The big giant, you could exaggerate it and have a giant fly spray with the paint coming out. The enormous, great big cartoon, stupid, make humor, bring humor into it, chicken with the enormous tax file. I've linked them all together. Let's see what I forgot. So I got the swimsuit and the pencil. We got the bread and the beetroot. We've got the frying pan and the tax returns. We've got, oh, I forgot the magazine and I didn't draw it in. So that's why I forgot it. So I would need to have done something like put the magazine under the chicken's other elbow, or have it wrapped up in the leg so that I can see him struggling to hold it. Or you could have, so Do you see how by not bringing it into the picture, I missed that association? I've got the chicken, I've got the sugar, I've got the fly spray, I've got the toothpaste, and I've got the paint. So by missing out one item from the drawing, I found that I forgot one of those things. So ACE it is a really good way of remembering, making a connection. So when you park your car in the car park, look around and see if there's a particular tree or a sign, or look back and see. What I often do is look at see where the shops are and which order the shops are and which perspective they're at. Don't make a note of the cars on either side because they might drive away and then you're stuffed. So make sure it's a permanent association, but make some kind of really strong connection that you can use to help you remember that. Okay, right, have a quick look at this. Oh, hang on, before we do that, just comment. Anybody want to just comment on that and that association? Chunking it, what do you think that means?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. First of all, I've enjoyed both memory exercises, but my comment was really, so chunking is categorizing or grouping them.
Yeah, exactly.
My comment was really on the words I'm more familiar using and the words that I may not relate to, that I don't use every day. So exactly. I found some words particularly easier to remember and some just a little different from what I'm used to. Yeah.
And that's very true. If it's sort of in your mind and you can picture it and you remember it and it's in that long-term memory, you're much more likely to connect it. And this is why, and we'll go into how you can build that efficiency in your association and how other ways of doing this, but also making sure that you use exaggeration, because if you test your memory, for me now, I would have to go back in and modify that picture to add the magazine in somewhere to make sure I remembered it. And if there was one aspect of that wasn't very memorable, and it might be something like the pencil, forgetting that I had drawn her legs down into a pencil. So then you have to make sure you add some more exaggeration or more clarification to that point to make it more memorable. Does anybody else want to comment at this point? Okay, let's carry on. This is a different strategy that I wanted to share with you. And a number of these are from Tony Bazan. He has some awesome stuff on memory. So do look him up and find and track him down. It's also quite fun. He does some great stuff. Anyway, this one again is another way of using a number association, but this one is particularly useful if you need to keep the items in a set order. With the other one, it didn't matter whether I remembered toothpaste before beetroot and after sugar, as long as I remembered all the items. But there may be some times when you really need to remember the items as well as remember the order. So the first thing you need to do is create your own number rhyme and your image to go with it. So you've got the number rhyme here: 1 bun, 2 shoe, 3 tree, 4 door, 5 hive, 6 sticks, and so on. And you can see that what we've got there is a close rhyming pattern so that you can remember 1 goes with bun. Your next important thing that you're going to do is to create a really strong image to go with that. Now, my bun is a beautiful, great, big, steaming bun with dripping white ice cream, not ice cream, that shiny cream, icing, that's the word I'm trying to say, dripping off the top. And it's a big bun with a slightly smaller bump on the top, and it's really big and fat, and it's steaming. I can smell that delicious bun. 2, my shoe is actually an old tramp boot with the sole has come away from the rest of the shoe. So there's a hole. There's really yanky mud all over it. We've got the big metal eyelets and the shoelace is laced through it and it's all hanging off and it goes up into a boot, but it's all torn and it's muddy and it's a real tramp's boot, okay? Your shoe might be a beautiful glass slipper or a sneaker or a pump or a flip-flop. I don't care, as long as you create an image that is really memorable for you. And if you can't remember it and you can't visualize it, you need to change that image. It's got to be instantly memorable for you. 3, tree. Now my tree is an old oak type tree. It's very old, short, quite a short fat stem with a beautiful wide branching tree, and the branches come all the way down and almost touch the ground on either side, and it's just got a feeling of timelessness about it. 4, door. My door is a round, like a hobbit's door, a round wooden door with a big brass handle. Make the features really, really, really memorable for you. 5, hive is a beehive for me, and it's just your classic round sort of beehive, and you can see the not the wooden ones that you see that you buy, the practical ones now, but the old-fashioned sort of open round beehives with the stripes and so on. I'm going to not go through the whole of my description because I don't want us to run out of time. Then once you have established that memory, and you need to visit it every day, once or twice a day, to really, really, really consolidate your visual images of your items. Now, I am going to use as an example something I use this for to teach the kids in chemistry. And this was way back when I was teaching. I was working in learning support in a boarding school here in Kenya. So this would have been in 2000. Oh, so that's 20 years ago. So not just the other day. And I've had no reason to work with this since then, but I never have any problem remembering this. The kids had to learn something called the reactivity series. And we're talking about 11-year-olds. And the teacher came to me and said, Scylla, how am I going to help these kids remember this series? So the first thing we did is we taught them this number memory rhyme system. And each of the kids spent some time really building their images. Then we linked it to the reactivity series, okay? So the first word is potassium. Now, I thought of a beautiful big African clay pot, words, beautiful big clay pot, I still can't do it, with the zigzags and the dots and the lovely colors and the lovely ochres and the blacks and the reds. And sitting on top of the clay pot is my bun. And the icing is dripping off the bun and down the sides of the pot, linking the pot with the bun. So 1, bun, pot, potassium. 2 is sodium. And I thought about an orange Fanta soda. And I imagined that my shoe was full of Fanta. And of course, because the sole and the shoe was separated, the Fanta was all bubbling and pouring out from there and through the eyelets for the laces and out of the top. And this lovely, cool, sparkly looking Fanta was pouring out of all the holes on that shoe. 2, shoe, sodium. 3, tree is calcium. And my way of remembering that was I thought about teeth. So instead of having maybe like an apple tree with lots of apples hanging in the tree, I've got all these sets of false teeth hanging all over the tree. So I can think about tree, calcium. One of the kids had calculators hanging in their tree. Different people associated it with different things. So again, 3, tree, and immediately the image of my tree comes up and the image of the false teeth hanging in it, calcium. So you do see again how we're using association and rhyming to develop that order. So when you've got to have them in a specific order, this is a really useful tool to help you do that. Okay, any comments? 5, 4, 3.
I think one thing I will just say is that it's really pointing out from what you were talking about, how for you that tree had teeth, but for another student that tree had calculators, and it's about involving the children in developing their own memory system, because then I think they would respond to it a lot easier. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It's super important. It's their own image. I can't impose my images on you. You have to create your own image, because that way it's going to be memorable. And when you're practicing and reciting, you may get up to 6 sticks and think, oh, 6, what is my image of sticks? And if you can't immediately pick it up, you need to work on redo that. Now, my sticks is giant, you know those, I don't know what you call them, like a pogo stick, the ones that those clowns use to make themselves really tall. And I hadn't even thought about it, but my zinc is the 6, and I have a zebra. I immediately can image the zebra trying to use those sticks to stay up. So I remember that 6 sticks is zinc. But it's no good me imposing the memory on you. You have to create your own image. And you'll see that we'll come back to image quite often, because imaging, the good old story of picture paints 1,000 words. It is a really, really useful tool for helping you with memory and recall and comprehension. Okay, let's move on. I'm not going to do the whole thing because we want to. So this is another Tony Bazan, and it's quite similar, but this time rather than a rhyming, I want you to create your own image. So you're going to turn the number into a symbol. So my number 1 is a paintbrush. My number 2 is the swan. My number 3 is a sideways heart, and so on, okay? So you can again use this. This doesn't necessarily need to be memory in order, but you can create a story using these images. And I've used this quite often with things like certain multiplication tables. You know your kids struggle. You can't do this with all of them, but you can pick 2 or 3 that it's really difficult to find another way to help them remember this without, if they can't recite it. And you know, your kids with dyslexia and dyscalculia, they really struggle with something like multiplication and remembering their multiplication tables. So what I've done here is, again, I need to be able to create a really strong image in my mind that reminds me of the numbers. So my 0 is an egg, my 1 is a paintbrush, my 2 is a swan, my 3 is a sideways heart, and so on. And the image I've drawn here is one I use to help me remember that 7 4s are 28, okay? So my 7 is a cliff, or it might be a boomerang, but in this case, I've used it as a cliff. And I've imagined myself standing on the top of that cliff and looking out over the sea. And on the sea, I've got a boat, and which has got a lovely big red sail or whatever. And that boat is, the sail is my number 4, okay? Then I've got a swan, and I haven't drawn it because this was about as well as I could do, but in my image, the swan is actually burdened down by the snowman, the weight of the snowman. So the swan is like swimming, struggling to swim in the water with this huge, great big snowman on his back. And my snowman wears dark glasses, and in the sun, he's actually starting to melt, and the ice is dripping, the water is dripping onto the swan. But that image immediately comes to my mind, and I can remember that 7 4s are 28. So this one doesn't use quantity or anything like that. It just uses a mnemonic or run, and it's rather like the I ate and I ate, I was sick on the floor, 8 8s are 64. In this case, we're looking at using visualization and association. Okay, so have fun with that, but you've got to create your own images. We have in the resources given you some images to help you, but really it's important to create your own images, because you must have that association. And remember, you've got to get it into your long-term memory. So you need to visit it several times so that you make sure that you've got it set in your memory. Okay. Any questions on those two?
So, Silla, we had a couple of questions. So one of the questions is, someone was asking, how can you use ACE with neurodiverse learners? And I think we would need to address this question in two parts, because how are we going to support students with learning difficulties using ACE, and then the applicability of ACE when we're coming to students with more involved needs, such as students who may be on the spectrum who are not as high functioning as others.
So one of the issues we have, we see quite consistently with neurodiverse learners, is they struggle with that transition from concrete to abstract thinking and that introduction of higher order thinking. So this can be really helpful in allowing them, and can help them, using ACE can help them transition into starting to interpret, because you can do something like, say, if you're trying to help them understand things like on and under and over and above, and trying to get some of those more abstract concepts together, if you've created that association, so you may have talked about maybe a cat sitting on the stool, and you spend a bit of time first of all describing the cat. Has it got long grey hair and a big fluffy tail, and has it got bright blue eyes? And you really get the child to create the image of that cat. So then you may talk about the chair or the stool, and again take time to make sure it is memorable. And again, you may use exaggeration. It might be a giant stool with a tiny little cat on it, or a tiny stool with a giant cat on it. Use that exaggeration, use color to create a really concrete image. Then, of course, you can then talk about the cat is on the chair. Now, what happens if you put the cat under the chair? And talk about, if you've got the giant chair and the tiny cat, are you going to be able to reach the cat to put it underneath the chair, or vice versa? So by using ACE, you can help them understand these more abstract concepts like what's the word? Position, you know, or point of view, or things like that. You can also use it to help you with things like reading comprehension. So, and help them build the ability to monitor for sense and monitor for meaning. So if the child has read, the jungle walked into the courtroom, and in their image, they've got these trees marching, great big oak trees marching into the courtroom, and you go, hang on a minute, that doesn't make sense. And they go back and they look at that sentence and they go, the judge walked into the courtroom, and change that image into a judge with the big wig, which now makes sense. So by using ACE, you can help them build their ability to monitor for sense, their ability to recall what they've written, and their ability to understand concepts like positionality. Does that answer your question?
I mean, yes, I just thank you very much for that answer, Silla. And I think particularly when we look at working with children on the spectrum, you do find that they respond to visual stimuli a lot better than they would, you know, just to verbal stimuli. And I think ACE is a really great way, like Silla said, to be able to use it when we come to working on comprehension skills, and just being able to put those words into a language that they're able to process better. So definitely, thank you for that question. The other question that we had is a very interesting one, Silla, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say about it. Someone asked, can you erase memories, you know, if a child has had a traumatic experience? So this is the question, is this really something that we would be talking about from educational perspective, or is this something that we need to be looking at from a sort of psychological perspective? Does it fall in the educational arena, or is this something where we say, okay, that's...
This is much more as a psychological thing, and I don't think we're going to have time to go into it in much depth now, but in short, yes, you can. There are sort of three key areas in the brain that need to work together for memory and all these. And one of them is the hippocampus, one of them is the amygdala, and one of them is the prefrontal cortex. So that is the area where emotion is connected. So you've got the amygdala, which is all your emotions and your feelings. You've then got your hippocampus, which is your memory, and then you've got your prefrontal cortex, which is your thinking brain. And those three come together. And it means that when you have an experience, and this happens, you know, a positive sensation, you have a slice of cake, okay? Oh, that was really nice. You eat it. You remember the sensation of the nice taste. Your memory associates that nice taste to the cake, and your prefrontal cortex goes, yeah, we need to have another piece of that cake. So part of the nucleus accumbens, you then lean out, and you can then, the motor unit, you can then take another piece of cake or another bite, and the three work together to build that association. Now, this can become a problem when it becomes out of sync, or that what can happen with addiction is your memory bit becomes hyperactive, so you super remember that memory of that good feeling, but your senses and the amygdala get suppressed. So in order to get that same feeling of satisfaction, you have to eat more and more and more and more cake, or drink more and more and more alcohol, or smoke more and more dope, or whatever the addiction is. So when we have that memory, that emotion, and that thinking cortex, they tie in together, you have you do have that issue. But it does mean that we can target it in, and we can undo, and we can work with a psychologist to undo that association with breaking that negative emotion that's linked to that memory. Okay. Right, we need to move on. We've got sidetracked. Oh, why is it that it's a different button I press each time? Okay, we're not going to spend too much time on this. I don't think. How much time did you say we have?
I think so. If we could do another 10 minutes, 15-ish, so then we have some time to open the floor for questions. Okay. All right. Discussion.
So I'm going to go through this one really quickly, because we need to just talk a little bit more about memory. I'm going to describe a picture to you, and I'm going to use these tools to help me. Okay. So I'm looking at a picture of a shark, a great white shark. It's gray in color, and it's swimming from right to left. It looks quite serious, but it's the main part of the picture. Underneath, we've got some green reeds, just 2 or 3 clumps of green reeds. And way in the background on the right, quite small, I can see a swimmer. And I can see the bubbles coming up. He's in a brown wetsuit, and he's got a helmet-y thing on, and he's just swimming along behind the shark. And then underneath the shark, we've got 2 little fish that are also swimming along. So I've one shark, we've talked about the size, the shark is really big. The reeds are quite tall. The ones at the back are quite tall. The ones near the front are a little bit smaller. The color, the shark is gray, the reeds are green, the diver is brown. There's 1 diver, 1 shark, and 3 groups of reeds. Shape, we've talked about, we haven't much. The reeds are tall and thin. The shark is long. The swimmer is quite long and thin. Where they're obviously in the ocean, there is a feeling of motion. You feel as if the swimmer is floating along and the shark is floating along. Mood, it's actually quite a peaceful scene. Background, there's no real background. I can see, I presume it's all just sea. Perspective, I'm looking straight on at the shark. It's swimming right to left. When I don't really get a feel of when this has taken place. And sound, I imagine I can hear the bubbles coming up from the diver. So I'm hoping that you've created, and we've done it really quickly, so you'd have to do it a little bit more thoroughly, but I'm now going to show you the picture, and I want you to just, if my compute that, I want you to let me know how it is different to the picture that you had in your mind from my discussion. So I don't think we have time to go into this too much, but just from your point of view, how was it different? Was the shark bigger or smaller? Was it more menacing or friendlier? Were the two fish underneath smaller or less obvious? Was the diver swimming at a different angle? I forgot to mention his mask, of course, so you may not have put on the mask. Were the reeds different? So this is building your imaging and building your ability. And this is a really, really important skill to be able to do. And use this and take time with this, because this can help your kids really build that ability to image and interpret and visualize and then verbalize what they're thinking. So this is a really cool activity. This is from Visualizing and Verbalizing from Linda Mood Bell. I forgot to reference her. So again, you see, we keep coming back to imaging because it does have a really important role. Okay, sorry, we're going to race on. Sorry, breathe. I try not to speak too quick. I mentioned that we are going to really look at working memory because that is the most important part of it. I'm not going to go into too much technical stuff, but it is useful to have a little bit of an understanding of how your working memory works. And you can see there the visual spatial sketch pad, and there is that one. Again, we're coming back to imaging and the importance of imaging. But you've also got the audio one, the listening and the sounds and the words and the vocabulary and language. The episodic buffer is a really important thing, and it kind of pulls the whole thing together. But the one that's super important is this central executive. Now, this is the model that is based on Bailey, and he talks about the three pieces. And I wanted to just touch on that central executive because this is really important in helping you understand how you can maximize the efficiency of your working memory. Your ability to inhibit, and this is slightly an attention thing in that it's what do I need to pay attention to and what do I need to ignore? And this is an area where your kids with an ADHD or an attention deficit really struggle. Do they listen to the bird that's singing outside, or do they listen to you talking in the classroom? And that whole variation in what do they pay attention to? What do they have to suppress and ignore? And what do they actually pay attention to? So that is super important. And it's a negative. It's what do I need to ignore? What do I need to push away? The other one that's really important is the shift. And this is, again, really super important. And it's about being flexible in your thinking and being able to transition from one thought to the next one. And this, Nazia is going to go into more because this is really tying into that executive functioning. But it is important that you understand that it is a crucial, important part of that working memory and that ability to inhibit, to shift, but then also to update your working memory. And do you remember I said that it doesn't have much load space? So you need to make sure that what you have in your working memory is what should be there and what needs to be there. So imagine that you're an artist and you're painting a picture, I don't know, of the beach and the scene. What colors are you going to have on your palette for that picture? You're going to have blues and yellows and whites, maybe some greens, but you're not necessarily going to have purples or reds unless you're doing a sunset. So what you're going to have on your palette is only the colors that you need on that particular task. And all the rest of your colors are in your cupboard, which may have hundreds and thousands of different shades. But you're only going to have on your working memory what you need for this task. And as you move through different areas, you need to get rid of what you no longer need and refresh it with what you do need. So that ability to know when that is no longer necessary, to move it on and to replace it with something that is current. And working through those 3 steps and building your efficiency in those 3 steps. So you've got to focus on that attention, you've got to focus on that ability to shift. And it's that flexible thinking. So yes, this is memory, but there's cognition that comes in. So that metacognitive bit talking about later, is super important here. That executive functioning, all three of these components come into play in a big with your working memory. And the more efficient your working memory is, the more successful you are going to be in class or in teaching or work or whatever it is that you're trying to do. Okay, so thinking of it as a cycle and how these three all come together and focus on that central executive is super important. Okay. Oh, come on. Okay. So just a reminder that your working memory has a limited capacity and temporary storage information. It supports through process, and that's where your perception and your long-term memory and action, movement, and all of that comes into play to supporting your working memory. The really crucial thing about your working memory is that you are able to manipulate information. And this is why it is so important in class. Now, there are a couple of things that really do impact on working memory. One of them is anxiety. And if your anxiety levels are high, your efficiency of your working memory is going to come down. So if you can reduce your anxiety, you're going to improve the efficiency of your working memory. If you can improve your working memory, you're going to have a positive impact on that anxiety. So anxiety, a really important thing to be aware of, all of the mental health issues, but anxiety especially. The other one I'm going to mention just very quickly is processing speed. And again, processing speed, think back to the kitchen stool at the beginning. Processing speed was one of those really important legs of the chair that we talked about, that we need that leg to be as strong and steady and the same length as the other two chairs. Processing speed, information processing speed, and memory are two of the really important processing systems that we need working together. And if your processing speed is not good, it's going to affect your working memory. And likewise, if your working memory is not effective, it's going to impact on your processing speed. Now, working memory is much more, we can do much more to influence and improve and perfect our working memory than we can our processing speed. So you need to home in and target that working memory, because that's going to support all your other processing systems. All right, so just out of interest, who thinks they can remember that number we looked at the very beginning? And who feels emotionally anxious or inadequate or worried by the thought that I'm asking you questions, and who's really glad that I can't see them and that they don't have to answer? I want you to think about your emotional reaction to my questions and your emotional reaction to me putting you on the spot. Because remember, sometimes when your feelings of you're trying to support your child and their learning, and you're trying to encourage them, they may not see it as encouragement, they may see it as pressure. And that pressure then brings in some anxiety, which then reduces your efficiency as a learner. So bear that in mind as we now go through some questions, and just have a think about what technique today appeals to you. Remember, you're not going to get it straight away. You need to be able to stop and think about it, and you need to learn it and practice it. But have a go, visit Tony Bazan's website, try some of these techniques, and see if you can work with them with your child. Take it slowly and make sure that if you're using something like the number rhyme or the number image, that you work to really, really get those images remembered and in the long-term memory before you start using them as a tool for memory. They must be able to remember the rhyme or the images first of all. Okay, I think
Thank you very much, Scylla.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So there are some resources. So as far as remembering is concerned, that everyone, I mean, not everyone, but we've had someone say, I can remember the shopping list, but not the number. Someone else has said that the picture image for memory is the best technique that they have learned today. So that's really great. We do have one question, and that question is, sorry, just one moment. That question is there any advice for effective strategies to teach memory to visually impaired students? Anything that they could supplement with what they've learned today? So that would be.
I think there's two things. First of all, it would depend on whether how bad their visual impairment is. And to be honest, I think it's super important that you build their imaging skills anyway. And I don't mean just because, but because they can't physically see doesn't mean they can't imagine. And I think that actually it's even more important to help them build their imaging skills. Now, obviously, if they've never been able to see, things like colors and shapes, you can help give colors a concrete image for them. You can work less on colors and more on shapes because they can feel shapes. Building their imaging, you just use, if they don't have the colors, if they weren't ever able to see and they don't know colors and they can't image colors, then obviously focus on a different sense. So think about building their hearing, listening, and what does it sound like? You can still build that association, and you can still build imaging. Just because they can't see doesn't mean to say they can't image and they don't have an imagination.
I mean, to add on to that, as far as visually impaired students are concerned, also you want to use the tactile sense as well. So you can refer them to different shapes, different textures, different sizes, just to promote that memory, because you know that there is value in that as well. So if you even just look at, you know, how do you work with if I'm now just thinking about when we have students with visual impairment and hearing impairment, then you're really just maximizing on their sense of touch. So you know, don't underestimate the role of other senses is what I think also is worth considering.
Absolutely. And again, you see, you can bring in exaggeration. And if you're using imaging to help with things like building that vocabulary, you can have a toy stool and a toy cat, or a toy car and a toy house, and you can physically help them understand and feel it by putting the car above the cat and the cat below the car to associate that. So you tap into their other senses and have a think about making sure that you keep their whole sensory platform as balanced and developed as possible, so that their senses will develop to accommodate the one that's compromised, but you need to make sure that you keep the rest of the playing field as balanced as possible.
Perfect. Do we have any other questions that anyone would like to ask? Someone has said, I've realized that some of my students are able to learn better when they fidget. If you are able to learn while they're sketching as they listen, some make stuff with papers as they're listening. I feel it works with some, but haven't known clearly why. So I'm not sure if this is a comment or a question.
Well, I will respond to it. What triggers learning in the first place? What is it that triggers learning from the day one? It's movement. And movement is what kicks in your brain's development. And so movement is often, for a lot of these kids, and what's happening is that movement is allowing them to bring in, remember that inhibition and that focus, it's allowing them to bring it in. So those kids that need to move, don't stop them from moving, allow them to move. And, you know, when you're in a classroom, you can always have them seated on the side of the room so that they can get up and stand beside their table without disturbing the rest of the class or without blocking the view of someone behind them. You may have a standing desk on the side of the room, and that they can go and move. If they need to move away from their chair, they can go and stand and work on the standing desk for a bit, or they may move and sit on a medicine ball so that they get that gentle bouncing. I used to have clay a lot in my class, either blue tack or clay. We had clay play rules. So the interesting thing is that you've got to make sure that they are paying attention and that they're not allowing themselves to be distracted. But the interesting thing is you've got to be careful. Some of these kids with sensory stuff, when we talk about multi-sensory teaching and learning, we've got to be careful that we're not undermining their learning efficiency. You can do one cognitive task at a time, okay? So you can either listen to what I'm saying, or you can pay attention to the animal that you're creating in your hands, okay? Or I can look at the graph that you've got on the whiteboard and look at what it's saying, or I can listen to what you're saying, but I can't pay attention to both. So when you are working off a graph or a chart on the board or on the computer, you need to make sure you give the kids the opportunity to go between your voice and the visual. And you need to give them times to stop and look at the visual and stop and listen to you. Don't expect them to be able to follow the graph and listen to your explanation at the same time. And when you are asking them to go backwards and forwards between the two, slow down, slow your speech down so that they've got time to connect between the two. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, the thing is, going back to movement and how it can trigger learning, as long as they are paying attention to you and not to what they're doing, often playing with a bit of clay in your hand, or sitting on a bouncy ball, or standing up and pacing and moving, allows them to focus in on what you are saying, and it allows them to enhance that processing role. I remember a very interesting student many years ago, where I was at a school in Kenya, and this was a boarding school. So we had lunch in the dining room. This particular student had epilepsy, and she was really struggling with learning. And she often had quite a stutter, and it was quite a challenge to get a whole sentence or have a full conversation with her. And it was a good old-fashioned British school, and so kids were always being told, look at me when I speak to you, and look me in the eye, and all this kind of thing. Working with this particular student, I noticed that when I was speaking to her, her eyes would lock in on my mouth, and she would be fixated by watching my mouth move. So I started working with her to look up beyond my eyes, and take her eyes away from my movement of my mouth and look beyond me and focus on the sound and listening to what I was saying rather than my mouth making the words. And suddenly she was actually able to, it reduced her stuttering, she was able to have a cohesive conversation with you. She was able to express her thinking. So then I go off to this staff meeting, and I'm telling, and they already think I'm batty as anything because I'm always coming with harebrained schemes. And I now stand up and go, when this particular student is discussing and talking to you, do not make her look at you. And when she looks away, don't stop her. Allow her to look away. So I could see them all sort of looking at me and shaking their heads. And anyway, 2 or 3 days later, the headmaster comes running into the staff room after lunch, and he's so excited he could barely speak. He said, Scylla. I was sitting next to, let's call her Jane, at lunch today on the prefect's table, and I turned to her and asked her a question, and I fully expected us to have a monosyllabic answer. And her eyes drifted up away from my face, and I remembered your comment, so I shut my mouth and bit my tongue. And we then had the most interesting, extensive conversation I have ever had with her in my life. Why does it work and what's going on? And I said, she's just getting pulled in by the wrong stimulation. So she's so busy watching your mouth move that she's forgetting to listen and focus and concentrate on the words that you're saying. So some of these kids struggle with that inhibition as to what they should suppress and what they should focus on. So with that working memory, remember those three steps: the inhibition, the shift, and the updating. So that ability to work with that motor is helping them suppress and focus in on what they need to be paying attention to. That was a long-winded answer, but I hope it makes sense.
So just while we're on that, fortunately we have our in-house OT. I'm calling you our in-house OT, who says, as far as the movement is concerned, another nice movement activity is placing a TheraBand on the legs of the chair so the student quietly kicks it. And absolutely, that's a great idea. But like Phyllis said, you want to ensure that you're not...
You mean one of those exercise bands?
Yeah, and stick it on the legs of the chair, and the student can quietly kick it. But of course, you want to make sure that the child isn't, hyper focusing on their TheraBand and not on the lesson. Yeah. So I think, so someone says, can we also say that environment, background, and age factor influences a child's memory? But before you continue with that, yes, you will get a link, and then we can ask Scylla if she can share with us this presentation, but you will definitely get a link to this session for you to just review later. So going back to, can we say that the environment, background, and age factor too influences child's memory?
Certainly, yeah. And you see, what you've got to remember is up until 6, you've got this really interesting period where your brain is just exploding. And then you go through a period where your brain is pruning away all of that explosion, which sounds crazy, but that's how the brain works. And in fact, it's where that pruning has not been effective is often the cause of some of the challenges that our neurodiverse learners have. So age is really important, and what developmental stage they're at. You've then got the situation that round about 11 to 12, they're going to be transitioning from concrete thinking to abstract. And again, there's different stuff going on in the brain, and they've got to start, they're losing that concrete, and they've got to start being a much more linking into their higher order thinking. So depending on what stage they are, their developmental stage, they're going to have different bits, if you like, bits of their brain that are developing. Those early kids as well, your left and your right brains develop at a different pace, and it's different depending on whether you're a girl or a boy. So that is another thing that you do have to bear in mind as well, and that is all going to come into play. And that right hemisphere, which is so strongly visual and spatial, is generally a step ahead of the left hemisphere. And that's really why our early childhood development is so much more visual than later on, because we know and we instinctively are aware that that aspect of those kids is much more developmentally ahead. But remember that girls and boys develop the order of the development. The order of the skills coming into play is the same order. It's just the pace and the speed with which they come into play. So your boys are going to be behind the curve compared to the girls on the language development. The girls are going to be behind the curve on the visual spatial development. It's a fact of life. I'm not being sexist. It is what it is. Live with it.
So we've had Scylla, this presentation was so interesting. I'm that girl who often watches people talk and realize I haven't paid complete attention to what they have said. I am working on it. So that's great that you've found a reason to not look at, to be able to excuse yourself from possibly not having to look at someone when you're speaking to them. And it's very interesting because in as much as when we're talking about children, autistic individuals, in as much as more traditional practices were trying to get autistic children to look and to maintain eye contact. Later on, some people have written autobiographies where they've said that if you want me to listen to you, I cannot look at you because I cannot do both these things at the same time. So I think what Scylla has said is very important in terms of you have to understand what a child, what helps them process information and allow them to process information the way that they need to process information. So thank you very much for that, Scylla. And I'm glad that it's giving us an understanding of our students as well as clearly of ourselves. Do we have any other questions? So while I'm waiting for any questions that are going to come in, again, I want to just point out that today's session is the first of the 4-part series that looks at exploring the mind. So now that you've registered for today's session, you don't need to register for the next 3, which is next week for mine, the week after for Dave's, who's here with us, and the week after for the Meet and Ask the panel. So today's registration applies for all of them. And you are going to keep on getting lots of emails and links and all of that. So don't worry about having to re-register. But if you know someone who hasn't registered, in as much as they've missed out on today's, they can still continue to register and be able to access the following sessions that we're going to be coming. So registrations are not closed, but you don't need to re-register. You will, as Scylla said, get resources for Scylla's session, and then next week you'll get the resources for my session, and then the following week, so that they're applicable. And you're going to see a really nice interplay between all of the sessions where we're all touching on what the other person has said, and hopefully by the end of the 4 sessions, you'll have a better understanding on how your children learn, how they process information. And so I really request that you don't forget to tune in next week. That's 4 o'clock UK time, 6 o'clock Kenyan time. You can use a world time calculator if you need to find out what that looks like on your side of the world. And now we've got some more questions while I rambled on. And
before you start, very, very quickly, I'm hoping that the resources don't have the spelling mistake that's on this last slide. It's Tony Bizan, there should be a Y there. My apologies, but I'm quite sure that Nazia's eagle eye has pick that up on the resources. Sorry, carry on with the questions.
I'm not so sure about that, but thank you very much, Scylla. I always say to people, between my husband and I, if you want something done quick, come to me. If you want something done precisely, go to him. So hopefully we won't have missed out on that. So we have, I'm a teacher who only talks when students are keen. Oh, I'm a teacher who, okay, so this teacher is saying that she talks when students are focusing on her face. And now through this session, she's learned students to be free and flexible while she's teaching. I'm so glad this is an eye-opener. One of the things I say is we're all about inclusion. We're all saying inclusion, get the neurodiverse learners in the classroom. But through this exploring the mind, I hope you will understand that getting these students into the classroom, into our schools, is more than putting their names on a register, and is more than getting their names enrolled and in our files. It's about accommodating, understanding and accommodating their needs. And that's really what we're looking at doing, getting you to understand how these learners function, such that if we're only going to include learners on a register, then we're setting them up to fail if we're not accommodating their needs, understanding them. Then we're basically saying, here you are, you're a part of our school, and now you have to meet the same expectations as students who are abled in a different, who process in a different way. So please use this information that Scylla's giving, that I'm going to give, that Dave's going to give, to ensure that you are doing more than putting our kids on our school registers. So
also, just, sorry, very quickly on that point as well, one of your most important roles as a teacher is your ability to observe. So if you're asking, and you know, 1, 2, you know, what's it, 2, 3 eyes on me, or 1, 2, 3 eyes on me,
yeah,
getting the kids' attention is absolutely fine. But if you know you've got a kid that struggles to listen when they're looking at you, you can sit and quietly work with them, and once their eyes are on you, you can then teach them that they then glance their eyes up to the side so that they can then concentrate. So you can still use that eyes on me to recall them, but then you can teach them a strategy that once they're now recalled, they now let their eyes go elsewhere and their ears come forward. And you can just give them, you know, a metacognitive skill of thinking aloud, or I must look out now, I must look away, I must listen carefully, so that you can kick that into gear.
Perfect.
Sorry,
No, that's perfect. And so someone says, Scylla, if your neurodiverse child is able to remember what you said while not focus on you, does that mean you should stop insisting that they look at you?
Yes,
and I think
absolutely.
that is what you're saying. Yeah.
Exactly. There was I remember a lecturer who said that he had this, in one of his lectures, he had this woman who sat in the front row and knitted through his whole lecture, and it nearly did his head in. He could hear the click, 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 click. At the end of it, the question she then fired at him, she had clearly heard every single thing. She had not looked at him once. And a lot of people, they can't cope with that visual stimulation. They need to just, and often, and now the secret here is, if you know you've got a kid who really is a strong auditory processor and really just needs to listen to it, they don't necessarily register where their eyes are looking. So if they're on, say, the right-hand side of the classroom and their eyes are staring outside the window, and you go and you can fire a question at them, but you think you're going to catch them in the act of not paying attention, and they come back at you with the answer straight away, you know that that's a kid that mustn't look, needs to listen. And then put them onto the left-hand side of the room so that their dominant ear is turning in, and it looks as if they're engaged in the classroom and the teachers are not going to kick them in. But this is where you as a teacher needs to know your student. It's one of the 3 keys of inclusion: know your student, know your curriculum, know yourself. And by knowing your students, you must be able to recognize where to seat them in their classroom depending on their needs.
I like, Scylla, that you said know yourself. And I think as a teacher, that part of knowing yourself sometimes unfortunately means you have to put your own needs aside. So as much as you prefer that a student looks at you, if the student can't learn that way, then you need to just shift something within yourself.
Bite your tongue and live with it. Get over it.
Yeah. And it is a hard thing to do, but you know, I think that sometimes it's a necessary thing to do, because are we looking at satisfying our egos or succeeding our children? So that's really, really great. And I think one of the things I really like that Scylla mentioned that we've gathered from her talk is at the very beginning, Scylla talked about sensory and about an occupational therapist. And then there was someone who asked about children and trauma, and then the topic about psychologists came in. And I think one of the important things that we need to take away is, and Scylla herself is an educational assessor. And I think what we're taking away from it is you can't underestimate the value of having a multidisciplinary team. So if you are a teacher and you have a Scylla coming into the classroom or an occupational therapist coming, you mustn't feel threatened, and you must be able to say, hey, you know what, this is just strengthening the support system that we are developing for this child. Scylla, what do you have to say as far as being able to get teachers to maximize from sessions like this and from interactions with professionals such as yourself?
Well, you know, one of the key things about an assessment, and it's why I got so interested in assessing, is if we can understand a kid's profile, we can understand how to support them. I would not necessarily have known if a child has a very, very weak visual memory unless I had assessed this child. I would not necessarily, the amount of times that I have teachers going, just can't pay attention, he doesn't pay attention, he doesn't pay attention. I assess the child, and the child's got a processing speed that is on the floor. If the kid can't keep up with the pace of the lesson, they're always going to be behind the curve. They're paying attention, they're just a couple of seconds behind you. So they're always behind the curve, which means that they never have time to consolidate their understanding. They don't have time to set that memory. So assessing a kid, if you think class, don't assume you know what's going on. And don't go, oh, he's got dyslexia, because you don't know what's causing the dyslexia. Don't stop at the label, start at the label. Once you understand what path they're on and why they have a breakdown in their learning, then you can integrate, then you can actually really target the intervention. You can support the other teachers and help them know how best to support this child. And everybody, then you, at the end of the lesson, you actually feel the child's gained something and you've achieved something. It's pointless but that kid being in your class if they're not learning. You want that child to learn. And knowledge is power. The more you understand about that child's learning profile, the more you're going to be able to support them and help them and understand what's going on. So yes, there are some disadvantages to assessments, and they don't need to put the child into a box, but knowledge is power. And by understanding their learning profile, you can then make informed decisions about how you're going to support that child and modify their program.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. So while I have everyone here, if you go onto the chat box, you will find a link to a very, very short and quick questionnaire that I'd like you to please answer. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to give you a little bit of an update on what to expect next week. And because we have Dave in the room, we're going to have him, I don't know if this is putting him on the spot, talk about what he's going to be taking us through on the 18th. So next, so far we've looked at sensory circuits. That helps just getting children in the right frame of mind. We've looked at behavioral interventions to try and facilitate, desirable and appropriate behavior. And today, Silas talked to us about different ways for us to be able to support memory. So next week, we're moving away from the academic domain, and we're going to be looking at executive functioning to help children with routines and with just managing themselves. Of course, with particular focus to neurodiverse learners. However, these are strategies that you can even use with your typically developing students and children. And that session is really going to be looking at a lot of what Silas talked today and how does that translate to routines, not so much learning. This was the first session that we had, but of course, Keep Going, Keep Growing was not popular at the time, so we didn't have as big a turnout, but now we've got a really good group of people who are regularly attending, and there has been several people asking when we're going to be doing this session again, so now the time has come. And so we're going to be looking at that next week, and that is on the 4th of July. And then on the 11th of July, we've got Dave talking to us about metacognition. Dave, do you want to take a few seconds just to give everyone a bit of a trailer on what they can expect to hear from you on the 11th of July while everyone is filling in those forms?
Okay, you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah, good. Excellent. I'm on. Fantastic. Well, yeah, we're going to do a session on metacognition, and don't be put off by the long word. It's really kind of simple and user-friendly strategies to apply in different kind of scenarios and different situations. And metacognition itself is just looking at what's the best conditions that a learner can learn. A neurodiverse learner, a neurotypical learner, but what are the best sort of conditions? What does the brain enjoy? And we're just going to look at the way the brain works. We're going to look at some simple strategies, and we're going to look at the concept of metacognition, which is kind of like knowing yourself as a learner, knowing yourself, creating the best conditions for learning to take place, and then throwing in a few little strategies just to make sure that learning happens as best as possible. So it's all good advice, hopefully, and useful skills.
Great, and Dave also has got vast experience working in mainstream schools here in the UK. And you've got someone saying that they love your artwork. Yes, Dave is a seasoned artist, and someone and everyone who meets Dave, that's something that they comment on. So maybe he can, throw in an art class at some point. But so just to let you all know, our Keep Going, Keep Growing series, as we said, was really looking at supporting parents and professionals during school closures. And when you go onto the link, you're going to see something talking about the next phase. So when this 4-part series is called Exploring the Mind, that's within Keep Going, Keep Growing. So it's almost like Keep Going, Keep Growing brings Exploring the Mind brings Scylla and myself and Dave. And this is the last of our free sessions because we're now finding that, you know, we want to be able to maintain this. And so when you are going to hear that, you know, this is the last of our phase one, it doesn't mean this is the end of Keep Going, Keep Growing. It just means that now that schools are officially going to be closed for their summer holidays, that means we've done what we wanted to, which was support parents and professionals during school closures. And then now we're ready to move on as everyone begins to return to school. So we hope that we're going to still have the same level of interest as we have had during this first phase, and we hope that'll be carried into the next phase. Scylla, is there anything you would like to say as your parting note?
I just want to clarify one point, okay? This whole business about eye contact, all right? Now, there are some students we know that struggle with eye contact, and it is a social skill that they need to be able to do. So you need to help them learn that there are times to look at someone and time to look away. So if they have to take the information in, if it's a learning situation and they need to look away, that is fine. But there are also times where they also need to look at the person, and that they can learn that skill of looking at somebody in the eye, greeting them, and then possibly looking away. So be careful that you recognize the two different situations of eye contact is an important social communication that needs to be built as a life skill. But there are times that we as teachers and parents have to recognize that they struggle to learn and listen and understand when we force them to do that eye contact. So that's all. Other than that, memory and remembering is a really important skill, but learning and understanding and building that higher order thinking and association, our Kenyan system, and to some extent the British system, can be heavily reliant on content. And just being able to regurgitate facts does not necessarily show your understanding. So while there is a role, and in memory is super important, building into what Nazia and Dave are going to be doing, looking at that metacognitive bit of being able to take a concept and make sure you understand it and grasp it and process it, is also super important. So you get into the analysis side of stuff. So great evening, guys. Enjoyed spending time with you. Hope you're all madly making pictures for your shopping lists now.
Perfect. Okay, everyone. So thank you very much for attending. We really look forward to seeing you next week. Don't forget, you don't need to register, but there's still spaces available for anyone else who you feel may benefit from these sessions. If you are done and you have answered the questionnaire, you can feel free to leave. Scylla, Dave, and I will just hang around if in case anyone wants to have a chat with us privately or separately. And other than that, have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you again. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Great, bye.
Is it possible to have Scylla's email? Certainly. Nazia, do you want to put it onto the resource?
Yes. So what I'm going to do is I will send you
the website.
I will, yes. I think, Mohammed, if you got the introduction newsletter, you should have had Scylla's website there. But I'm just very quickly going to say, when you get the recording, just explore the website and you will see Scylla as one of our friends, who's one of the people we work closely with, and that'll give you also an opportunity to explore her website and sort of see what she does. Because one thing we didn't mention, which we must mention next week, is Scylla does educational assessments remotely as well. So if you want to look at your child being assessed to understand their memory and how to support their memory, as well as so many other aspects of their learning, you want to contact her, especially for virtual sessions, because I think that sometimes works. Sorry, what was I saying? I read a question.
There's a perfect example that we can't do two cognitive skills at a time. The first question is about fee. Does it mean the fee for one session?
Yeah, so just going back to Mohammed, I was trying to say virtual sessions are really great because they do come at you know, the fees also, I think, are a lot more friendly as well if you have a virtual session. So, and your child isn't in Kenya. So yes, please contact her and look for her FT Enterprise, but you will get her contact in here. Pronounced as Juan. Is that Yuan? But yes, I've got a question. The first question, yeah. So this is the thing, is we're just looking, yes, for one session or for a per session or per month. I mean, just give me your thoughts. We're just exploring about how we can continue to ensure keep growing is sustainable. So yeah, for one session, or do you think that you prefer that fee to be per month? I mean, I'm just interested to know. It's a very open question, so just answer it as best as you can. I hope I've answered your question, Juan, or is it, I don't know, Sila, would you call that Juan or Yuan?
Juan?
Yeah, because she has specifically said Juan, so
yeah. But otherwise it would have been Y-O-U, Yuan.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, Juan, we're discussing your name.
No problem. Thank you.
Tell us how